My name is Rachel Miller, and I was 17, living in Maplewood, Pennsylvania, which felt like the kind of place where nothing much ever really happened, especially if you didn't have a way to get out of it. My world at that time revolved almost entirely around my car, an ancient, beat-up sedan from the 1980s, a real clunker that my Aunt Carol had passed down to me. It wasn't just a car. It was my freedom, my connection to anything beyond the small bubble of our town. The uncles, and there were many of them, along with my dad, had spent countless hours tinkering with it, keeping it alive, patching it up like a beloved family pet. When I turned 16 and finally got my driver's license, Aunt Carol had been ready to buy a new car, and bless her heart, she initially wanted to sell the old one. But the newspaper ad for it probably cost more than anyone would pay, and my family, seeing how much I needed it, convinced her to just give it to me. I poured so much of my meager allowance and babysitting money into that car, replacing brake lines, the steering line, the brakes themselves, and even the alternator more than once. It was a constant battle against rust and wear, a never-ending project, but it was mine, and the feeling of having my own wheels, even if they were barely spinning, was everything. Being poor meant a lot of things, but at least we had a garage full of tools and a family that knew how to use them. One Tuesday afternoon, my cousin Mark, who was a year older than me and had been staying with us for a while, showed up in the living room with his buddy Todd. They looked desperate, which was unusual for them. Usually they were just lazy. Todd's pickup truck, a shiny, newer model that made my clunker look like a dinosaur, was at the dealership getting some warranty service done. They needed a ride, and of course, I was the only one with a car available. The problem was my car's alternator, the part that charges the battery while the engine runs, was out again. I was flat broke, saving every penny for another repair, so I hadn't been able to fix it yet. This meant my car was essentially running on battery power alone, and once that battery was depleted, it died and needed a long overnight charge before it could go anywhere again. I had it down to science. A full charge usually gave me about 22 miles, maybe 23 on a good day, before it would sputter and quit. They needed a lift about 15 miles each way, which was right on the edge of my range. Mark and Todd, seeing my hesitation, quickly promised me gas money, and more importantly, swore they'd give me a jump start from Todd's newly repaired truck once we picked it up, so I could make it all the way home without worrying. I really didn't want to go. It was a hassle, but family sticks together, right? I reluctantly agreed, hoping they'd be good for their word and give me enough money to actually buy more gas than I'd burn, and that they'd follow through on the jump start. So off we went, the three of us crammed into my rattling sedan, the engine groaning under the strain as the battery slowly drained. The drive to the dealership felt like an eternity, every bump and creak of the car reminding me of its fragility and my dependency on it. We finally pulled into the dealership lot, and I dropped them off at the service entrance. We went inside, and they hung around, waiting for Todd's truck to be ready. It took maybe 10 or 15 minutes, which felt like forever, before a service advisor came out and handed Todd his keys. Todd turned to me, a smirk already playing on his lips, and pressed a crumpled $5 bill into my hand. "Here, S for gas," he said, which in the 90s was a decent amount for a fill-up, but it wasn't enough to make up for the trouble, let alone my draining battery. "We'll meet you out by your car to give you that jump," Mark added, already halfway out the door. I walked out the front doors of the dealership, a sense of unease starting to settle in my stomach, and went await by my clunker, which looked even sadder parked next to all the shiny new vehicles. A moment later, Todd's big, polished truck came roaring around the corner, music blasting, the windows down. Mark and Todd were inside, both laughing hysterically. My cousin Mark looked right at me, a wide, taunting grin plastered across his face, and then slowly, deliberately, he lifted his hand and flicked me off. The truck's tires screeched as Todd hit the gas, leaving me literally in their dust, standing alone in the parking lot, watching their tail lights disappear down the road. The humiliation burned, hotter than any exhaust. My stomach dropped, a cold knot of dread twisting inside me. I knew with absolute certainty that my battery did not have enough charge to get me the 15 miles home. I had tested it, timed it, had it down to a precise science. It was before the days of cell phones, so I didn't have a way to call for help right there on the spot. Panic started to set in. I walked back into the service desk area, trying to keep my voice steady, my face calm, even though I felt like screaming. I explained my predicament to the person behind the counter. "My car needs a jump start. Or if someone could just pull my battery and put it on a charger for 20 minutes or so, I could make it home, I pleaded, hoping for some human decency. The service manager, a balding man with tired eyes, just looked at me, shrugged, and said, "Nope, we don't do that here. Sucks to be you." His words were a punch to the gut. I felt tears pricking at my eyes, but I swallowed them back. I wasn't going to let them see me cry. I asked if I could borrow their phone, and after a brief, exasperated sigh, they pointed me to a payphone on the wall. I pulled out my tattered address book, the one I carried everywhere, filled with dozens of numbers I knew by heart, because that's what you did in the 90s. I started calling, dialing number after number, my fingers trembling slightly. My mom wasn't home, my dad was at work and unreachable, my Aunt Carol was out of town. I called other aunts, uncles, family friends, anyone I could think of. The minutes stretched into an hour, then another. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I got a hold of my Uncle John, a kind man who lived a bit further out but was always willing to help. He said he could come by, but it would take him a few hours to get there. So, I sat there in the dealership lobby, trying to look inconspicuous, fuming, simmering with a rage that grew hotter with every passing minute. Every time someone walked by, I felt their eyes on me, judging me, probably thinking I was some irresponsible kid who didn't know how to take care of her car. All I could think about was Mark and Todd, probably back at my house, laughing their heads off about how they stranded me, probably raiding the fridge, and definitely, absolutely, playing my Nintendo 64. That N64 was really the only thing I owned that truly felt like it was mine, something I'd saved up for, cartridge by cartridge. I had planned to spend that entire afternoon playing Mario Kart and GoldenEye, with the house all to myself. Instead, I was stuck, humiliated and helpless. The betrayal, the disrespect, the absolute callousness of them just driving off and leaving me stranded, it filled me with a cold, hard resolve. When Uncle John finally arrived, a beacon of relief, he not only gave my battery the much-needed jump, but also pressed a $20 bill into my hand. "For your alternator fund, sweetie," he said, his eyes full of sympathy. It was incredibly kind of him, and I was grateful, but it didn't erase the burning anger I felt towards my cousin and his buddy. The minute I pulled into my driveway, the first thing I did, even before getting out of the car, was plot my revenge. I knew exactly where they'd be. In the living room, probably high, definitely glued to my N64. That was phase one. I marched inside, ignoring their shouts of, "Finally, Rachel, what took you so long?" I went straight to my room, dug out some old, broken audiovisual cables, and spent a solid 20 minutes meticulously crafting a dummy AV cable for the N64. It looked perfectly normal on the outside, but on the inside, it was wired for absolutely nothing. I then stealthily swapped out the real cable, hiding it deep in my closet under a pile of clothes, and plugged in my fake. When they tried to turn on the N64, all they got was a blank screen. They swore they fiddled with the connections, they tried another game, but nothing worked. "Stupid cable," Mark grumbled, kicking the console lightly. "It's just a bad cable, guys," I said innocently, from the kitchen, a small smile playing on my lips. They were furious that they couldn't play GoldenEye all high and mighty, but what could they do? A bad cable was a bad cable. That was a small victory, a satisfying little jab, but it wasn't enough to quell the deep-seated anger from being stranded. Phase 2 was much more sinister, and I wasn't sure it would even work, but I was determined to try. I waited patiently, letting a full week go by, until the memory of them screwing me over had, in their minds at least, faded into just another funny story they occasionally chuckled about. During that week, I kept an ear out, listening to their conversations. They talked incessantly about their jobs at Todd's dad's warehouse, a place a few towns over, a big industrial facility where they apparently spent most of their time smoking weed and goofing off. The next Saturday, when everyone else was out, I walked to the local gas station, making sure I had enough change for the payphone. With a racing heart, I dialed the number for the warehouse that I had heard them mention. When Todd's dad answered, his voice gruff, I took a deep breath and launched into my carefully rehearsed script. "Hello," I said, trying to sound mature and concerned. "My name is Rachel Miller, and I'm a student at Maplewood High. I'm calling because I overheard something that's been bothering me, and I felt like I had to say something as a good citizen, you know?" I paused, letting the silence hang. "I just wanted to make you aware that I've heard your son, Todd, and another young man, Mark, talking quite openly at school about working at your warehouse while they're high all the time. I'm really concerned, especially with forklifts and heavy machinery involved. It just seems like a really big safety risk, and I thought you should know." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Todd's dad just grunted, a single non-committal "huh" before hanging up. I stood there, clutching the payphone receiver, my heart pounding, wondering if it had worked, if he'd even believe me, or if he'd just dismiss it as teenage drama. The uncertainty was almost unbearable. Another week crawled by, and I started to think my elaborate plan had failed, that Todd's dad hadn't taken me seriously. Then, one afternoon, I heard it. A guttural scream of pure, unadulterated rage erupting from the living room. It was Mark. He was absolutely losing his mind, pacing back and forth, tearing at his hair. "They fired us," he shrieked, his face red with fury. "Both of us, Todd and me. And his dad took away his truck because of some random drug test they made us take." He was truly losing his mind, kicking at the furniture. My blood ran cold, a shiver of satisfaction tracing its way down my spine. It had worked. Mark, who didn't even have a car or a driver's license, even though he was a year older than me, had relied entirely on Todd for rides everywhere, for going to work, for hanging out, for everything. And now, not only did he not have a job, but he also didn't have a way to get around, completely stranded, just like they had left me. He couldn't even get another job, not without transportation. Phase 2, the most sinister phase, had turned out to be the best phase, a complete and utter success. Life in Maplewood slowly began to regain a semblance of its old rhythm, though for Mark, it was a much slower, more confined rhythm. I eventually fixed my car's alternator, using Uncle John's $20 and every penny I'd saved, and my clunker was once again running reliably, a symbol of my regained independence, but also of a new kind of power I now possessed. Mark, on the other hand, was pretty much stuck at home, endlessly complaining about boredom, about not being able to go anywhere, about how unfair life was, especially without his buddy's truck and a job. He never suspected a thing, never once connected my quiet presence, my innocent demeanor, with the sudden, catastrophic upheaval in his and Todd's lives. He just assumed it was bad luck, a random drug test, an unfair boss. And I, Rachel Miller, the quiet girl with the clunky car, kept my secret close, a warm, satisfying ember glowing deep inside me. I was still Rachel, still navigating the awkwardness of being 17, but something had shifted. I understood now that being a model citizen could mean many things, and sometimes the most effective way to ensure justice was to take matters into your own hands, quietly, precisely, and with just the right touch of civic concern. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I drove my old car with a new kind of confidence, knowing that while some people might try to leave you stranded, you always had the power to make sure they got a taste of their own medicine. And sometimes, that medicine came in the most unexpected and permanent of forms. And as for the N64, the real cable remained hidden, a small, private reminder of the first taste of sweet, silent revenge.